Welcome to the Founder's Journey podcast. My name is Peter Dean. I'm one of the co-hosts. Our goal is to interview some interesting founders and share some actionable tips on leading a startup and their personal stories behind the founder's journey. I'm what some people have called a serial entrepreneur. I've founded three companies in my journey, funded two of them. In the last one being Ram Tribe, we're a customer acquisition agency that builds go-to-market strategy and executes on behalf of funded B2B SaaS software companies. We've had the pleasure of being part of multiple SaaS companies' journeys over the past 13 years in growth. Our guest today is my co-host, Greg Moran. He's the co-founder and managing partner of Evergreen Equity, Mountain Equity Partners. They're a venture fund focused solely on future of work technologies. He was the founder of a company called Outmatch, now called Harvard, a global leader in talent selection for some of the most successful companies in their industries. So, Greg, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here. This is a fun format that we have for our first two podcasts. If you missed the first one, it was me interviewing Peter. Now Peter's interviewing me, and then the entire podcast will not be us just talking to each other. However, we're just thought it'd be a fun way to kind of get started, and so everybody can get a chance to know us before we start bringing other guests on the show. So glad to be on the other side of the table now.
Yeah, Greg. So again, we joked last time about us talking on, and so we'll try to keep this to 40 minutes or so. And you've done a lot over the years you've been a founder. So how many companies have you been a founder in? Exactly.
4, technically, are the ones that I've founded. I've been involved in other ones, from an investor and things like that. But 4 that I actually founded. First one was pretty much right out of college. In the executive search and staffing space. Had that business for a number of years. I think it was probably about 5-6 years or so. This is back in the late 90s and then into the early 2000s. And had a couple, after that point. So so it's 4. 3 of them actually went somewhere. One of them was a debacle that I lost a bunch of money and walked away because of all kinds of problems. But 3 of them were great. So
kind of okay. What I've seen, like over the years talking to you, there's kind of 2, like I want to talk about 2 things. One is like pre-checked / outmatch Harvard, and there's an interesting reason why that you have 3 different names for the same company that kind of grew over time significantly, and then like pre-checked Outmatch. So why don't you talk about People Answers? That is a company that was an assessment company bought by Infor. So pretty successful company, and what your part was in that.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll start that one actually, right? Even in the business before that, that's the executive search and staffing business, and we had grown that business, pretty significantly. So this is going to date both me and you, Peter, but and I think probably a lot of people that are listening to this probably weren't even alive at this point, or in elementary school. But this has been the .com boom in the late 90s, and then Y2K. And we were doing IT staffing, which was huge boom market. It was a brilliant place to be in the late 90s, 2000, 2001. And it really, took a massive hit in around, 2001 after 9/11, and kind of in the world went into really a global recession. And so that business, while it was a rocket ride on the way up, it came down pretty hard. But during that business, we were looking for we were hiring a lot of recruiters and a lot of salespeople. We were up to about 50 people, I guess, internally. And we were having a lot of the same, we were a staffing firm, we were having a lot of the same challenges that our clients were, which was we're having a hard time getting people to perform and stay. So we started using assessments as part of our hiring process. And I became really interested in that space because I saw what it was doing for us. But at the time, it was not scalable at all, right? So you'd have a candidate like fill out some sort of a sheet and you'd fax it back to an industrial psychologist, and then they would like fax you a report that you didn't understand. So, there clearly had to be a better way to do that, but the results, were pretty amazing when you're looking at it from a staffing standpoint. So exit out of that business and was looking around and stumbled across through kind of a friend of a friend, a company called People Answers based down in Dallas. And I was living in New York at the time. And they had commercialized basically what was what we would now refer to as a SaaS technology, but this was before SaaS was a thing, right? So this is 2007, or again, no, actually for about 2001 timeframe, 2002. And what they had done is they basically taught a machine to think like an industrial psychologist. So, it really made assessment scalable across a large organization. So, you could be assessing thousands and thousands of hires a year. And, the reports are automatically generated, and there was some pretty, great information you're getting back about whether you make a hire or not. And that was the inception of People Answers. Got really interested in it. And with my business partner at the time, who now kind of fast forward 20 years and is my business partner again in Evergreen Mountain Equity Partners, which are a venture firm, we started commercializing that technology. And it was an interesting model that we had. We had the distribution rights to that product, but didn't own the IP. So we were essentially an outsourced sales organization carrying the same business card and everything else that the parent company was, but we're building it up, grew it really nicely, sold it back to the parent company because we sold distribution rights back to People Answers themselves. And they ultimately went on and did really what was a groundbreaking transaction in the SaaS space at that point with Infor back in 2014. So nice, really nice win. I had exited out of that business around 2007 to start Checked, and which we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a couple minutes. Yeah. But yeah, that business was a terrific business. Still around today, still part of Infor, and doing well.
So would you say they were more successful without you after you left?
Oh yeah, there's absolutely there's no doubt about it. There's a clear correlation between my departure and the trajectory of.
And so why did your partner come back and become a partner with you again?
You'd have to ask him.
I'm just kidding.
That's another podcast.
I'm joking, but Greg has this way of staying friends with everyone, even if he creates a competitor for them. And that's a good segue into Checked. How did Checked start, and what was that all about? And then we'll talk about a very specific time that you started it. Your timing is like impeccable.
Yeah, you'll notice a pattern of this, I think, in my career, where I have this real unique ability to start businesses or exit businesses at the worst possible moment in time. And so
you left People Answers. They became wildly successful and executed an exit.
Yeah, it was time to start something new. So we had started a company called Checked.com. This is back in around 2008. And what Peter's joking about is we literally incorporated Checked on the day that Lehman Brothers went under, which was really it was like the global financial crisis was like, this was like the apex of the financial crisis. And we're out trying to raise money for this software company. And, we're talking to investors, and investors are like, you can't be serious, right? Like I can't even keep money in a bag. I'm like literally burying my money in a garbage bag in my yard. And you want me to invest in your startup? And it was bad. I mean, we ended up.
That's one word for it.
Oh, good Lord.
It was like in a desert of capital.
Yeah.
If capital is water, we're in a desert with absolutely no water
Yeah, I
and
mean,
none
you
in
you
sight.
you literally had VC firms going out of business, which is almost unheard
Yeah,
of. But you know,
it's
it
amazing.
was actually happening, and you know, redemptions were out of control. I mean, it was just really bad.
Yeah,
So, you know, but the technology that we were commercializing in that business was really unique. And my entire career has been spent around HR technology, work technology, like future of work.
yeah,
And this was another technology there where we were commercializing technology that basically was applying assessment logic. So the same type of assessment from like a pre-employment, same type of logic from like a pre-employment assessment,
right.
but in this really, really niche place in the screening process of reference checking. So essentially the
Yeah,
way it worked is a reference, instead of getting a phone call and saying, hey, what do you think of Peter? Would you hire him? A reference was taking an assessment about the candidate. Now, take a reference like 30 seconds to take this thing, really light assessment, but you got some really incredible intel back to help make a more effective
and
hiring decision.
from what I experienced with it, because I used it, a lot more truthful. Like a lot, like when you call a reference and you ask,
Mhm.
"Hey, what did you think of Peter?" They're going to be like, "He's great. I don't
Yeah,
want to get in the way of him getting hired." Not
the
like constructive feedback. That's like he's he's not really good at accounting. He's very
right.
bad at that. And if it's for accounting, then that's not a good idea, right? You know,
Well,
like you're
what
not going
you
to get people to say that. Like when you
right, what
talk to
you
them, I
actually
feel
got was real. I mean, you got what was real balanced information about a person, which is ultimately what you're looking for, right? It's not necessarily a matter of like a good reference check or bad reference check, although we
yep,
get some of those too. But what you'd often find out about 10 or 15% of the time, you would find out that the person is just not a good fit for the job. And you never get that kind of information from a reference check. So we were incorporating technology around that. In the vein of our impeccable timing, not only could you not raise capital, companies were laying off in droves and not hiring anybody. So we also had
yeah.
that going for us as well. Um, so we drip fed that business for probably, you know, we did actually happen, we did raise capital, but we raised little bits of capital at a time. And really spent the next 2 years just developing the technology before we really started to commercialize it, because there truly, for probably the first 18 months of that business, there truly was not a market. You could not sell any product like that. So we took that time to build it, and we brought in just enough money to keep the thing going. And finally, around 2010, 2011, the market started to shift, and we were able to start actually bringing a commercial product out there, and the business started to grow, and it started to
What do you
become successful.
what do you think your breakthrough was? Was it like certain customers bought from you? Like what were some of your breakthroughs that you transitioned? Because that's a tough story to sell to an investor. We've kind of had like enough money and you maybe
Right.
had a couple customers. Like how
Disney.
do you get them? Yeah. How do
Disney.
you get to that
Um,
next one?
we got, so our market was large enterprise customers that we were selling to. And, up until that point, we had small companies that were using it, but we weren't generating a ton of revenue. And then it's actually a pretty funny story. It gets even funnier when you find out I actually ended up acquiring this other business. But we, back around, I guess it was probably around 2012 or so, we were just starting to get a little bit of attraction, but with smaller companies. And one day we get a phone call from Disney, and they were looking for a reference checking product and had heard about us, and wanted to start using us. The funny part of that story is our largest competitor was a company called Checkster. We were checked.com. Disney called the wrong company. They had us confused with Checkster and ended up buying from us. Now, if you fast forward that story a number of years, we ended up acquiring Checkster within Outmatch. We'll get to that, but which
Right.
I think their CEO of Checkster, who's since become a good friend of mine. I'm not sure if Yves is listening. I still don't know if he thinks that story is funny or not, but I think it's hilarious.
So
And
the
that's,
moral of the
look,
story is
serendipity,
name
right?
your,
Like when you're dealing with when you're starting you're involved in a startup, so much of this stuff is just pure
some luck.
serendipity, right? You you just stumble across an opportunity, and for whatever reason, it clicks. Landing them, we
You
got
just
that
have to,
logo, and that's what made us kind of legitimate.
you just have to have a name that's close to your competitor, and maybe
Yeah,
they'll call the wrong person
that's
or
right.
type it in.
That's exactly that was the strategy all along.
Yeah,
So
perfect.
yeah, we brought them in, and that's really what got us going, right? It was Disney, and then we expanded that business. We acquired an assessment, a pre-employment assessment that,
Yep.
and eventually, and then we landed Subway, and Disney and Subway became our marquee clients. And at that point, we were able to grow because we could grow just on
Yeah.
their names, right? Which is the way that startups often work.
Yeah.
And we were able to grow just by saying that they're clients. They immediately gave us the credibility that we need.
And that probably was really important for your next funding round to kind of keep things going, given the fact that you were kind of piecemealing it together at the time.
Yeah, I mean,
When was your like first real A round that you would say was an A round? Because I know you had like survival rounds
yeah.
to a point, and then at what point would you actually say you had an A round and you kind of
Yeah,
had some good growth?
we were doing a lot of we had a number of different angel rounds, right? Like convertible
Yep.
debt rounds that we had a number of angel investors involved in. The first institutional round, which I would say, I think by today's
Yep.
standards, you wouldn't really call it an A round, but
Right, but back then it was.
Back then
really.
it was.
Yep.
It was around probably 2013 or so. It was Rand Capital out
That's
of
right.
out of Buffalo, New York, and Cayuga Ventures, which is part of Cornell,
Yep.
affiliated with Cornell, out of Ithaca, New York. They were our first institutional investors,
Right.
and that's what gave us kind of the growth capital that we needed to keep going.
Great. So you had checked, it starts growing, and then you kind of get into that next stage, right? You're kind of close to a B, you're growing, you're getting success. Then what did you do? And this to me is really interesting because you had a company that was talking to you about acquiring you,
Yeah,
and
this
then
was
something
borderline.
totally flipped on it's some very different thing happened.
Yeah, this was borderline insane. So during the time when People Answers was getting acquired by Infor,
Yep.
I got to know, even though I wasn't involved in the business anymore, I got to know a lot of the private equity firms that were bidding on them before Infor ultimately won the sale process. And one of them just became a buddy of mine. We just stayed close, and he was a private equity guy out of the Bay Area. And, and he had said to me one day, hey, we should do something together if we can checked was too small for them to fund. But he said,
Right.
if we could find something larger that we can do together one day, I'd love to do it. I had a company down in Dallas that was calling us trying to acquire us. The problem was we were growing at north of 100% a year. They were growing not much, right?
Yeah, small percent, right?
Yeah,
More of like a lifestyle business, very profitable.
It was
did
a
great job.
tech-enabled service, very profitable in our direct competitor, but they were about 4 times our size. So what ended up happening was, they had been trying to acquire us, and it didn't make sense for us, right? Because we were the high growth, they were the slow growth.
Yep.
Culturally, real
It's not
mismatch.
probably good. It's not what you'd think would be a good acquisition for a company like you at the time. Yeah.
Right. Except we had really cutting edge technology. They had great clients. And so just at a random conversation with one of my board members, who will be a guest on the podcast soon, we had, one of our board members had said to me, why don't we acquire them? I didn't think that was a thing, right? I mean, we're doing a couple million in revenue. They're doing like close to 10. How do you do something like that?
Yep.
And he had said, look, I mean, we basically modeled the thing out, and let's talk to some investors, some potential investors who might be willing to do this. And I had my buddy Eric, who was the private equity guy out in the Bay Area, who had said to me, hey, let's look at something larger. And I called up Eric and I said, I have a completely insane idea. What do you, here's what it looks like. And Eric said, I'm in. And, we needed to then go try to convince the leadership of the
This
other
larger
company who's trying
company
to
that
buy
just
us.
to say,
Of course,
hey, by the way,
well, they thought we were crazy, right? And
Yeah.
the first question out of their mouth is, how are you going to pay for this? And, fortunately, we did have somebody lined up, and, and what sounded crazy in the beginning didn't seem so crazy. And they said, okay, because they were a little frustrated by their growth too, right? And they had been in it for 8 or 9 years and wanted to get out.
Yeah.
And, the timing made sense. And so, it took us a few months, but we actually closed that transition and acquired a company down in Dallas called Assess Systems. They were, here we were, right? We're a New York based startup that at this point is like 3 years old. They were basically a consulting business that had some technology that was literally like 30 years old. And many of the employees there had been there since inception.
Yeah.
I mean, the culture differences were enormous.
I want to get to that in a minute. So one thing I just want to make a comment. First, that was the first time I had ever heard of this. It sounded very crazy to me, and pulled it off, and I was like, that's amazing. But I've seen that happen since then. The same thing has happened again. So one of the things that I've learned is you should never let the traditional approach affect your idea of what could happen. That's something you've always kept open. And the other theme that I'm seeing is you've always fostered relationships with people, regardless of where it ended, like kept an open relationship with all these people in the industry. And you were very early with creating relationship with private equity when you really weren't a company ready for them. And that was, I think, a huge benefit to you in everything you did after. That we can talk about.
Yeah, I think a lot of founders in smaller stage companies tend to become very insular and think of funding rounds as like, okay, I got to go raise this round, then I'm
What
gonna
is
stop,
today,
and I go raise this other round. And I think one of the things that we did well and tried to do, and something I really try to encourage founders to do today, is develop relationships at all level of that funding cycle, right? So even though you're not ready for the big round today, maybe start to develop those relationships, because the more you know them, first of all, you never know what opportunities are going to come your way, like the one we just mentioned. And the other thing is it just takes time, right? You want to have that relationship, and you want that funding round to be a natural thing, because if you can just continue to update your story and build those relationships, and that's something we always did.
They can watch your journey, right? Like they've watched you, and that instead of you just going to them at this stage, you're like, great, you are at X revenue, you have growth, and you're a brand new entity to them. They've also watched you. They're like, wow, I remember when you were at 1 million, AR, now you're at 5. That was 2 years ago. That's pretty impressive.
That's right.
You've got my attention. They're listening to you.
Yep.
You're definitely farther down the stage than a company that's just saying, hey, I have 5 million ARR. Like, well, what is your story? And then you have to tell that in a pitch.
Totally. And and I think that's the thing. And I think the other thing that, I tell founders all the time is develop industry relationships, like with your competitors. Like, and I get this question all the time, like, well, how do you do that? You send them an email and ask them to talk, or you call them.
Call them.
It's amazing, right? But here's the thing, like, you have to be open, right? You have to be willing to share your information. The more open and transparent you are with your own data, the more they're going to be with you. And I think that's what helped in this situation. There was some trust that was already built.
So let's talk about, people can reach out to you and ask how the heck you did that. I'm sure you're willing to share. Like,
sure,
let's
absolutely.
talk about, we just talked about, you did this crazy funding, new thing, new idea. Now you have a new company of 25-year-old employees and, been with the company for 25 years or more, and a kind of lean, fast moving startup coming together in one entity. Like, what was that like? I know that question's very loaded because there's many conversations that you can have about that, but like, just how did that, what was it year one? What did that feel?
Turbulent, I guess is the word I would use. We were very different, I think. But, what I think when we look at that, when trying to bring two companies together, I was also the CEO of this, right? That, of this smaller company, I ended up buying the larger one, but I still had a lot of the leadership from the larger one, floating around. I think, if I look at that today, there's a couple of things that I think went well, right? One is we didn't expect everybody to fall in line on day one.
Yep.
Right. But we did expect everybody to be one company on day one. And I think, that it could have been a very slow and agonizing process had we not tried to bring the companies together immediately, but we didn't follow that. We did bring the companies together immediately. We insisted on, we were one company. We immediately embarked on building a shared vision of what we were building, a shared purpose for why we were building it, and shared values. And I think that happened immediately coming out of the gate. It literally started on the day we started the acquisition. I think that that was really big. And I think the other thing was just really trying to provide full transparency. We were going to have to make a lot of hard decisions.
Yeah.
But to try to provide full transparency about why we were doing the things we were and what the upside to the business was going to be and individually going to be. The reality is this was going to be a tremendous career opportunity for everybody in that company.
Yeah.
And it was up to the individual to decide if, what they were going to make of that. And I think the other part too, is we tried to give, not everybody was going to buy in. There were people that we never got bought in, but what we also tried to do is give them a soft exit. If they weren't, right? There was no harm and no shame in saying, this is not for me. I'm coming out of a 30-year-old lifestyle business that was very comfortable. There is no shame in saying, that's what I want. This is no longer the place for me. So I'm going to opt out. It's a perfectly valid reason, and try to give them as much of a soft landing as possible to make it easy for people to opt out. Right.
Because your employees are going to feel you had big investors now, pretty significant sources of funding that are expecting a very specific amount of growth over a certain time. So there's no way to hide that from them, right?
No, you can't. Yeah. You can't. We had to be fully transparent about what those expectations are, but also transparent about this is not going to be the place for everybody. It's just not. Yeah. And that's okay. Like, let's just be honest with each other, right? And let's decide who's in and who's out. Let's do that quickly. And if you're out, let's try to get you to a place where you're gonna love your work again.
So you had some really good leaders there. Like, as an outsider looking in, you went through this kind of period of, like you said, of turbulence, but within a very short period of time, you got to this point where, and I'd been out there. I worked with Outmatch. They were a customer of mine. So we were working with them on the marketing side, not directly with Greg, but with the CMO there. And you as a team got this company to a place where it was just an amazing group of people with a very clear shared vision and passion, and from being like this group of people that were put together like randomly, and now you have this amazing one driven, excited, like very admirable culture. Like, how did you do that? Like, how did you get it there? Because it's one thing to get people in an acquisition to be like, we're working together, it's great,
right,
this is good, we have a good job, to I believe in this and we are all on the same page. It was amazing
Yeah.
to watch.
Yeah. I mean, you had to, I think, well, first of all, we rebranded. So we had
Yep.
checked.com, which is a company that I founded, acquired a business called Assess Systems. And then we rebranded the company as Outmatch with, like I said, with new vision, new purpose, new values. We were, by all intents and purposes, a new company that we were building
Yep.
together. Right. And I think that message resonated because it was very real, right? We're going to honor where we all came from, but we weren't that anymore, right?
Right.
And we were truly building something groundbreaking together. And I think that, but it was that sense of shared purpose, right? It was that sense of, hey, we're going out and we're going to fundamentally change people's lives, because again, we were a technology that provides talent screening for large companies. We were going to go out and fundamentally change people's lives because we were going to make sure that companies are hiring the best possible talent and people understand if this is the home for them, like if that company is the home for them. That's what our technology was really enabling us to do. It became very mission driven. Everything was about the mission that we were on, and there were, both from a business standpoint and from sort of a societal standpoint. I think it became really powerful, and it just kept taking on a life of its own. I think we had, and by this point we had identified those leaders that were really focused on this shared vision, and we had helped those leaders who weren't really going to be part of that because they didn't want to be. We sort of would help them kind of exit the business. And that was really it, right? It was like you had fresh leadership that was really energized about the direction that we were going with this on the shared journey together. And culture is a funny thing, right? That when you start to turn that flywheel, it gets more and more and more powerful. It also goes the other direction, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that more than anything, that's really what did it. We just tried to communicate constantly and make sure that we're all on that journey together.
So you do this, and then you get to this point, and then you start buying companies. So like you acquired 2 companies pretty close to each other.
Mm-hmm.
When they came in, it was almost like they enhanced what you already had. That's what it felt like as an observer, right? It's like all of a sudden you went from like this amazing group of people to even better and like inclusive.
Yeah.
And then another one like that. Like that is so, like, you've been through a lot of acquisitions over this past, in this journey. Like, how did that happen? Like, how did you get him to be like, I don't want to say seamless, but it was like they wanted to be part of this
because of the relationships that we had built, right? And it's to say, it goes back to that funding story, right? We were buying companies that were in our space that we had developed, that we had been developing relationships for years. The CEOs of these businesses became personal friends. We shared a very common vision, right? We were going about it in different ways. They weren't direct competitors; they were complementary. But we had become friends with a shared vision, and I think where that ability to say, hey, this makes more sense to go at this together than it does individually. And we invested a lot of money. Like we put a lot of money behind this process, right? And I think it's one of the things I'm super proud of when I think back on it, is that we acquired a company in Guadalajara, Mexico. Mexico City and Guadalajara, and they're about 35, 40 employees or so. We flew every single one of them up to Dallas within a week, I think, or 2 weeks of the transaction closing, because what we wanted to do is just give everybody that opportunity to kind of literally and figuratively embrace what we had just done, right, as a business together. And I think it became infectious, right? That excitement just built in terms of look at the way that this is going. And we had done that a couple of times. It's an area that, those investments seemed somewhat crazy at the time. I mean, we would spend $100,000 in travel just to bring people up to, or more, probably 200,000, to bring people up to Dallas from all over the world when we did these acquisitions. But you can't even measure the ROI of that, right? And it wasn't even about ROI. It was just about the common
because
culture.
when you have those hard questions about like, what do you do with this piece of technology that maybe someone's really kind of connected to, and they've had a chance to actually build a relationship with someone, the conversation's a lot easier because you know them and you feel more comfortable with them, right? I mean, that's what I observed. It was a lot
Totally
easier to say,
right.
hey, our sales process is a little different than yours, and this is what we're doing. When you spend time with them and they're like, oh, that's, so and so, and that person's into the same thing I'm into, and we talked and we kind of made a connection.
Right. Because there
Made
was
it a lot easier.
trust, right? There was
Yeah.
trust. It wasn't a Zoom relationship.
Right.
It was a real relationship.
Yeah.
Because it does, again, you're going to have to, whenever you're doing M&A like that, you're going to have to make hard decisions. Not
Yeah.
everybody's going to be super thrilled with whatever, with every decision that you make. But if people trust each other and they see the big picture, it becomes a lot easier to have those hard conversations.
Yeah. So just to finish the story, you went through this process, got to the point, private equity shows up, it's time to sell. You have some exits for some of your investors that have been kind of around for a while. Tell me about that. Like, what was
Yeah,
that
again, my
like?
timing was
That's what you're
impeccable.
trying to do. Like, our goal when we start this is to get to that moment where you're like, hey, I actually have an exit, right? There's some
Yeah.
definitive.
Yeah, again, in the vein of impeccable timing, we closed a transaction with a large private equity firm to acquire a majority of the business on March 1st of 2020. So if you remember what the world looked like on March 1st of 2020,
It's like 15 days before everyone shut the doors and went
yeah,
inside.
it was like 5 or 6 days, I think.
Yeah.
I went down to Dallas. I live in Colorado. I commuted to Dallas for all these years. And went down to Dallas, went down to our corporate headquarters down there. And I went down there with our new private equity partners. And we had done a big company-wide party and all the stuff. It's on February or March 1st was like a Friday, I think. So it was like that following Monday or Tuesday.
And then the Wednesday or Thursday of that next week, it was like everyone's
I
shut
flew
the doors.
home thinking I'd be back down to Dallas in my normal routine a couple of days later. And it was July when I went back to Dallas for the first time because I had left a bunch of stuff in the office. And that was it. I mean, it was crazy.
Pretty good timing, actually.
Good.
Not bad. It'd be
Yeah.
harder to close that deal if it was supposed to close in April.
It would have been harder a month later, that's for sure.
So you got a little luck back from the beginning where you started when there was no capital, and then you closed before maybe people started to worry. And I know for software companies, it wasn't as bad. I mean, everyone reacted. We had to plan for what happened.
Right? And that was the problem, that like suddenly we were forced into this world of, we had just brought on brand new investors. We had a lot of fresh capital in the business. We had absolutely no idea what was going to happen. We were this super tight culture, right? Like we've talked about, and suddenly we're sending everybody home. Everyone's remote for the first time ever. Like we were a real office culture, and everybody's home. And and by the way, our clients are retail, restaurant, hospitality, and airlines.
Yeah, great.
So like if you try to position yourself in a worse place in a global pandemic, I don't know how you would have done it, right? And so
like, we're not hiring, we're furloughing employees right now.
We don't even know. I mean, there are airlines that didn't even know if they were going to be in business, right? Like we don't even know if we're going to fly our planes. Restaurants can't even open their doors, right? And so that's we're in this situation, and it was crazy. But our private equity partners, name of them is Rubicon Technology Partners, a terrific firm based in Boulder. And this just shows you the power of a great financial partner. I mean, the first thing that they did is they said, protect the people, keep them safe, protect whatever, do what you need to do to to be a good partner to our client and that our clients. And that meant in cases taking 3-year contracts and just erasing them in some cases, or cutting their pricing to 50% or whatever that took.
Yeah.
And, Rubicon's approach was, we're just going to manage our way we're going to figure out where the bottom is together, and then we're going to rebuild from there. And they, they were an unbelievable partner through that time. And not only did they do that, but then they also poured capital into the business to go start doing a bunch of M&A again at that time. I think during that period of time between around June of 2020 to when I wound down my CEO role in October of 22, I think we had done 7 M&A transactions, 7 more. So, I mean, it was something like that, 6 or 7. It was crazy.
Again, you'll get to know us during this whole period when we interview other people, because I'm sure we'll be sharing some of our stories indirectly. But this has been great. I would say some of the tips that I've learned actually from knowing you over the years, but that you talked about is like, obviously when you're funding, get to know the people early, right? And don't wait and go try to fund. Obviously talk to people early. You had relationships with private equity before you're even on the radar of those companies or those entities really at early. And that actually helped you get to kind of where you are today. And then don't be afraid to be, build those relationships internally, but also within your industry and talk to your competitors. And then that helped with getting those really good companies when you actually got to that point. I'm sure when you first met those companies, you weren't in a place to even consider acquiring them, but then it made sense later, and you had a relationship that made that much easier to continue that culture that you had built. Those are some important things. Anything else? Like, we have like a couple more minutes. Like, what did you learn about yourself during that time that allowed you to become successful during that journey? What about yourself did you work, like what self-aware thing did you learn during that process?
Figuring out what you're good at and figuring out what you're not good at. I think as you lead a really fast growing company, we had gone from basically a PowerPoint presentation, no employees, to about 300 people globally. And, tens of millions in revenue. And in doing that, I think, if you're going to evolve as a leader, you really had to figure out what you were good at and what you weren't. And I think what I realized about myself is, I'm a founder at heart. I'm a sales and marketing person at heart, and I'm a deal maker at heart. I love doing the M&A. I love putting together transactions. What I am not is a great operator. I am not, the person to go out and do, massive organization of large scale projects and things like that. I mean, I can force my way through it, but I'm not good at it, and I'm not going to enjoy it. And finding people who are was really critical. And I think, ultimately that is sort of exactly, that's what led me in around October of 2022 to say, I'm not the guy to lead this business anymore. Because it requires that skill set, and I don't have that skill set, and I can be more helpful from the outside than I can be from the inside now. You got to really figure out what you're good at. You can't force your way through this stuff, especially when the company starts to really grow, because man, is it obvious. And unpleasant if you're
trying to do it, do something you're not really good at.
And you don't enjoy, right? I mean, that's the thing.
It's true too. You got to survive all that stuff by waking up in the morning and having fun, right?
Well, look, the stress of a growth company is too much, right? The anxiety and the stress it provokes, the natural anxiety and natural stress it provokes are too big. If you're also not enjoying what you're doing because it's not where your natural skills are taking you, man, it just compounds that anxiety.
It's not going to work out. No.
No,
Yeah.
it's not good.
So knowing when to say, hey, that's enough for me, right?
Knowing
You know,
knowing what,
or someone else needs to do
or
this.
getting
Like,
yourself surrounded by those people. If you can
yeah,
get yourself in a position
yeah,
and making sure you're surrounded by those people who can complement those weaknesses that you may have with their own strengths.
awesome. This is great. Thank you so much, Greg. This was awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
You said this to me, but I'm sure everyone will know if they listen to this podcast where to reach you, how to get access to you.
Yeah, I mean, easiest way is on Twitter. It's Evergreen MEP. So it's the word Evergreen, and then the MEP stands for Mountain Equity Partners. So Evergreen Mountain Equity Partners, Evergreen MEP on Twitter's the best way to reach me.
Cool. And we will probably do a retake of this, of what we did before when we were screwing around and making it funny, so that you can listen to that version, which is something that keeps Greg and I laughing constantly in text. But
Nice. All right.
cool.
Well,
All right, we'll talk.
And we've got more episodes coming up here.
Yep.
Where it's not me and Peter talking to each other. It's
Yeah.
actually real people. Not
Great, real people.
Real people that are doing real things.
Real founders.
That are doing real exciting things. So
not like two guys from upstate New York that went to like unknown university. Siena College. Right. Actually, it's a great place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, and see you in the next episode.